My sister wanted to force me to pay off her debts amounting to $250,000, and my parents wanted the same, saying that I must do it. Hey Reddit. I've never posted here before, but I feel like I'm at my wit's end. I don't know if this is more about family dynamics, favoritism, or just plain unfairness, but I need some perspective. Let me set the stage for you because this story is messy and goes way back. I'm Alex, 24 years old. My life has been anything but easy, and most of that has to do with my parents and their blatant favoritism toward my older sister, Melanie, who's 28. Growing up, it was pretty clear who the favorite was. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was the independent one who, according to my parents, had to learn how to handle things because I was a boy. At first, I didn't question it. As a kid, you just accept the way things are, you know? Melanie got new toys. I got hand-me-downs. She got the latest gadgets. I got lectures about saving money. Still, I thought maybe that's just how it was with boys and girls in some families. It wasn't until I hit my teenage years that the differences became impossible to ignore. Fast forward to now. My parents stopped supporting me financially when I turned 18. No help with college, no money for rent, nothing. I had to work 2 jobs just to keep myself afloat while juggling school. Meanwhile, Melanie? She's been living her best life. My parents paid for her college, her grad school, and even helped her buy a condo in a posh part of town. They cover her travel expenses. Yes, she goes on lavish vacations at least twice a year, and her lifestyle, which easily racks up over $250,000 in expenses. The kicker? Melanie doesn't even work a full-time job. She dabbles in photography, but it's more of a hobby than anything else. She relies on my parents for everything. And the worst part? She doesn't even seem to feel guilty about it. Last month, I asked my mom about this directly. I was desperate for answers. Why do you help Melanie so much but not me? Her response was like a slap in the face. You're a man, Alex. You're supposed to stand on your own 2 feet. Melanie needs our help. I couldn't believe it. I've been busting my ass to survive, while Melanie gets treated like a princess because of what? Her gender? Their favoritism wasn't just unfair. It was downright cruel. The breaking point came when I found out Melanie was going on a 3-month tour of Europe, all expenses paid by our parents. This was right after I had asked them for help paying my car insurance. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a little assistance to get through the month. They said no, of course, citing their tight budget. Tight budget? For who? Not Melanie. I confronted them. It wasn't a calm conversation, I'll admit. Years of frustration boiled over, and I ended up yelling. My dad's response? Alex, we've given you enough. It's time you learn how to fend for yourself. Enough? I shot back. You haven't given me a dime since I was 18. Meanwhile, Melanie gets everything handed to her. My mom chimed in, trying to defuse the situation. It's not about the money, Alex. It's about teaching you life skills. Melanie, she's different. Different how? Different in that she's never had to lift a finger to support herself? Different in that she gets to live in luxury while I scrape by? I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. Instead, I just stormed out. I didn't want to say something I couldn't take back, though honestly, I think I had every right to. And Melanie? She's fully aware of the situation, but she pretends like it's not her problem. She once told me, "It's not my fault Mom and Dad treat me this way. I didn't ask for it." Sure, she didn't ask for it, but she also hasn't done anything to change it. She revels in the attention and the financial support while I struggle to make rent every month. It's hard not to resent her. I know she's not directly responsible for our parents' choices, but her indifference feels like a betrayal. She could at least acknowledge the disparity, maybe even talk to our parents about it. But no, she stays silent, enjoying the perks of being the golden child. Right now, I'm working 2 jobs, one as a barista and the other as a delivery driver. It's exhausting, but it's the only way I can keep my head above water. There are days when I barely sleep, days when I wonder if all this effort is even worth it. Meanwhile, Melanie is posting Instagram stories from Paris, sipping wine by the Seine, with captions like, "Living my best life." It's infuriating. What's worse is the judgment I get from my parents. Whenever I visit, they have something to say about my choices. My dad loves to remind me that I'm wasting my potential by not pursuing a real career. Easy for him to say. He's never had to work 2 minimum-wage jobs just to survive. And my mom? She's always comparing me to Melanie. Why can't you be more like your sister? She's so cultured, so sophisticated. I don't talk to my parents much anymore. It's too painful. Every conversation feels like a reminder of how little they care about me. I've even started distancing myself from Melanie, though she doesn't seem to notice. She's too busy enjoying her perfect life to realize how much damage this favoritism has caused. Recently, I've been thinking about cutting ties altogether. It's not an easy decision. I still love them, despite everything. But how do you stay connected to people who clearly don't value you? How do you keep trying when it feels like they've already written you off? That's where I'm at right now. Stuck. Angry. Hurt. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to keep fighting for their attention, their approval. Another part of me wants to walk away and never look back. But is that even possible? Can you really move on from something like this? 10 years. That's how long it had been since my parents decided I didn't deserve their support. 10 years of hustling, struggling, and scraping by on my own while Melanie lived her charmed life. I'd finally built something for myself, a career, a modest home, a sense of independence that I was proud of. And yet, they still found a way to drag me back into their mess. It started with a phone call from my mother. I hadn't heard from her in months, maybe even a year. I recognized the number instantly, but I hesitated before answering. The last time we'd spoken, she had made some passive-aggressive comment about me not visiting enough, as if I owed her my time after everything. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Alex, hi. It's Mom." Her voice was cheerful, overly so, like she was trying to butter me up for something. My stomach tightened. I knew this wasn't a social call. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" There was a pause, just long enough to confirm my suspicion that this wasn't going to be good news. "We need to talk about Melanie." I sighed. Of course, it was about Melanie. It was always about Melanie. What about her? "Well," she started, drawing out the word like she was trying to figure out how to phrase what she was about to say. "She's in a bit of trouble. Financial trouble." I didn't say anything. I just let her keep talking, knowing she'd get to the point eventually. "She's racked up some debts, about $250,000, and she's struggling to keep up with the payments. Your father and I have done everything we can to help her, but we're retired now. We just don't have the resources." There it was. The ask. I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Well," she said, her voice taking on that pleading tone I'd heard so many times before. "We were hoping you could step in and help. You've done so well for yourself, Alex. You've always been so resourceful. We thought you might be able to, you know, take care of it." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The audacity was unbelievable. "You've got to be kidding me. Alex, please. She's your sister. And for the past 10 years, she's been your problem, not mine. Why should I bail her out now? She had every opportunity one didn't, and she still managed to screw it up. She's family," my mom said, as if that justified everything. Family helps each other. I couldn't hold back anymore. Family? Where was that sentiment when I needed help? Where was family when I was working 2 jobs to pay for school while Melanie was jetting off to Europe on your dime? "You told me to fend for myself, remember?" "That was different," she said quickly. "You're strong, Alex. You've always been strong." "Maybe I am," I said, "but that doesn't mean I'm stupid. I'm not paying a cent for Melanie's mistakes." The conversation spiraled from there. My mom started crying, saying she didn't know where else to turn. My dad got on the phone at one point, trying to play the reasonable card, but it didn't work. They kept insisting that Melanie was desperate, that she had learned her lesson, that I was her only hope. I didn't budge. I told them I wouldn't be guilt-tripped into fixing a problem they had enabled for years. I wasn't going to undo all the progress I'd made just to clean up their mess. Then came the emotional manipulation. They started throwing out every guilt trip in the book. What would your grandparents think? Do you really want your niece and nephew to grow up in poverty? Yes, apparently Melanie had kids now, though I'd barely met them. None of it worked. I stood my ground and ended the call. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer, Melanie's lawyer, to be specific. She was suing me. Yes, you read that right. Melanie was suing me for family support, claiming that I had a moral and financial obligation to help her because she was my sister and our parents were unable to assist her. I was stunned. I sat there, staring at the letter, trying to process what I was reading. I didn't even know something like this was possible. Apparently, in some states, there were obscure laws about family members being responsible for each other's debts under certain circumstances. I couldn't believe it. I called my parents, furious. Did you know about this? I demanded. There was a long pause before my dad finally admitted. We didn't think she'd actually go through with it. You didn't think she'd go through with it? Are you kidding me? You let her get to this point, and now you expect me to clean up your mess? We didn't have a choice, my mom said weakly. She was desperate. Desperate enough to sue her own brother? This is insane. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I had to hire a lawyer to fight the case, which cost me money I didn't really have. Meanwhile, Melanie and my parents were smearing me to anyone who would listen. They told extended family members that I was selfish, that I was abandoning them in their time of need. Some of my relatives even called me, begging me to reconsider. Others sent angry messages, accusing me of being heartless. It was like I was living in some twisted alternate reality. Melanie, the golden child who had been handed everything on a silver platter, was now playing the victim, and I was the villain for refusing to bail her out. The lawsuit dragged on for months. My lawyer was confident we'd win. The case was flimsy at best, but it was still incredibly stressful. I had to provide evidence of my own financial situation, prove that I wasn't in a position to help even if I wanted to. The whole thing was humiliating. In the end, the case was thrown out. The judge ruled that Melanie had no legal grounds to force me to pay her debts. It was a relief, but it didn't feel like a victory. The damage had already been done. My relationship with my parents was shattered. Melanie and I weren't speaking, and most of our extended family had taken her side. Even now, I still get the occasional call or message from someone trying to guilt me into changing my mind. But I won't. I can't. I've worked too hard to build a life for myself, and I'm not going to throw it all away for people who never cared enough to support me when I needed it most. So that's where things stand. I'm estranged from my family, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly free. It hurts, but I know I made the right choice. At the end of the day, you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the ones who lit the match in the first place. The lawsuit was already draining every ounce of my energy when I realized I needed to be smarter about how I fought back. I knew Melanie and my parents were skilled manipulators. They'd been at it for years, but I didn't expect them to be this brazen. When I got the court summons, I knew I'd have to dig deep to protect myself. Luckily, I remembered something crucial. A conversation I had recorded months earlier, during the heated fallout from my refusal to help Melanie. It was one of those nights where anger bubbled over, and I decided to record the conversation, more for my own sanity than anything else. I never thought it would become evidence, but the recording was clear as day. In it, I stated multiple times, I will not pay for Melanie's debts. She had every opportunity one didn't, and I'm not responsible for her choices. I even added, if she's in a financial crisis, it's not because she didn't have the resources. It's because she squandered them. The recording also included my parents' responses, which were equally telling. My mom tried guilting me, saying, "How can you turn your back on your sister?" My dad was more condescending, mocking me for my supposed lack of family loyalty. They both admitted they'd asked Melanie to stop spending so recklessly, but they were unwilling to truly hold her accountable. When I told my lawyer about the recording, he immediately saw its value. This could be a game changer, Alex. It directly counters their claims of abandonment or refusal to communicate. But we'll need more. The case moved forward, and as expected, Melanie and my parents put on quite the show. They painted me as cold-hearted, someone who'd abandoned his family once he'd achieved success. Melanie even had the nerve to cry in court, telling the judge how my refusal had left her destitute and on the verge of losing everything. It was infuriating. But then came the discovery that changed everything. My lawyer had been digging through Melanie's financial records as part of the court proceedings, and what he found was nothing short of explosive. Melanie had a secret bank account with over $400,000 in it. This wasn't just a rainy day fund. It was a massive stash of money that completely undermined her claim of being in financial ruin. The way we discovered it was almost cinematic. My lawyer, Richard, noticed discrepancies in Melanie's reported income and expenses. Something didn't add up. After subpoenaing more detailed financial records, we uncovered the hidden account. It was under a trust name, but the account holder was unmistakably Melanie. The funds came from years of handouts from our parents, as well as some questionable loans she had taken out in their names without them even realizing. The day this was revealed in court was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Melanie's face went pale, and my parents looked utterly stunned. They had no idea about the account, and it was clear they felt betrayed. The judge immediately questioned why Melanie hadn't disclosed this during her initial filing, and her lawyer scrambled to come up with a plausible excuse. There wasn't one. My lawyer played the recording shortly after. It was the final nail in the coffin. Hearing my voice state, unequivocally, that I had no obligation to support Melanie, coupled with her financial deceit, painted a very clear picture for the court. Melanie wasn't a victim. She was a manipulator. When the verdict came down, it was almost surreal. The court sided with me, not only dismissing Melanie's case but also recognizing the years of manipulation and emotional distress I had endured. The judge awarded me $150,000 in compensation for non-pecuniary damages. It wasn't about the money. It was about vindication, about finally having proof that I wasn't the villain they tried to make me out to be. But the fallout didn't end there. My parents, who had always defended Melanie, suddenly turned on her. My mom called me later, sobbing, saying she couldn't believe what Melanie had done. "She lied to us, Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "We didn't know about the money. We thought she really needed help." I didn't have much sympathy left. "Mom," I said, "you chose to believe her over me for years. You enabled her behavior. Maybe you didn't know about the account, but you created the environment where this kind of manipulation could thrive." She didn't have much to say to that. Melanie, predictably, didn't take the ruling well. She accused me of ruining her life, of turning our parents against her. She tried to paint herself as the victim once again, claiming she only hid the money because she was scared it would run out. Her excuses didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and no amount of manipulation could undo the damage she'd done to her own reputation. As for me, I finally felt free. It had taken years of struggle, countless sleepless nights, and a courtroom showdown, but I'd finally stood up to the people who had tried to control and undermine me for so long. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the life I'd built, the independence I'd earned, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Now, I'm focusing on moving forward. I've cut contact with Melanie entirely, and my relationship with my parents is complicated. They've apologized, but it's hard to forget the years of neglect and favoritism. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that you can't let other people's expectations dictate your life. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means walking away, even if it's from the people who are supposed to love you the most. And sometimes it means fighting back, not out of spite, but because you deserve better. For me, that fight was worth it. The court case was behind me, but the damage it left in its wake was permanent. Any remaining thread of trust or connection with my parents or Melanie had been thoroughly severed. I knew it the moment the verdict came down. Melanie's lies and their blatant enabling had crossed a line that no apology could ever undo. Cutting ties wasn't a decision I made lightly, but at this point, it was the only way I could protect myself from more harm. After the ruling, my parents tried to reach out. They called, sent messages, and even showed up at my place unannounced. I refused to answer. I wasn't interested in their excuses or attempts to salvage a relationship they had spent years tearing apart. Melanie, predictably, was less apologetic. Her final message to me was a venomous email accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful, as if she hadn't been exposed as a fraud in front of a courtroom. I blocked her after that. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be completely alone. For years, I had fought for their approval, their recognition. Now, I didn't want it anymore. But cutting ties didn't erase the bitterness I felt. nor did it erase the memories of years spent feeling like an outsider in my own family. I thought I was finally free, but the anger lingered. I didn't know how to move forward. That's when everything took another unexpected turn. Several months after the trial, I received a letter from an attorney's office. At first, I thought it was related to the court case, maybe some leftover paperwork. But when I opened it, I found something entirely different. The letter informed me that my late grandparents had established a significant trust fund before their deaths. The fund was meant to be split equally between Melanie and me, but there was a catch. My parents had been named the trustees, responsible for managing the money until Melanie and I reached a certain age. The attorney's letter explained that my parents had failed to disclose the existence of this trust, effectively hiding it from me for years. They had, however, given Melanie access to her share when she turned 25. She had already burned through most of it. My share, meanwhile, had remained untouched, quietly accruing interest and growing to a staggering $3 million. I was floored. I couldn't believe what I was reading. For years, I had struggled, scraping by with 2 jobs, while my parents sat on this fortune that was rightfully mine. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, and, strangely, vindication. This was yet another example of their favoritism, but this time, there were legal ramifications. I contacted the attorney who had sent the letter, a man named Daniel Hoffman. He was meticulous, professional, and sympathetic to my situation. He explained that my parents had no legal right to withhold the trust from me once I reached the age specified in my grandparents' will. However, since they had failed to fulfill their duties as trustees, we would need to go to court to force them to relinquish control of the funds. I wasn't thrilled about another legal battle, but there was no way I was going to let this go. Daniel assured me that the case was solid. My grandparents' will was explicit, and the paper trail left little room for interpretation. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. My parents had not only abandoned me when I needed them most, they had actively withheld resources that could have changed my life. The court process was grueling but straightforward. My parents didn't put up much of a fight. Perhaps they knew they didn't have a leg to stand on, or maybe they were too embarrassed by the exposure of yet another one of their lies. Either way, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full access to the trust, along with a scathing reprimand directed at my parents for their gross mismanagement. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange sense of closure. The money was significant, life-changing, even, but it wasn't just about that. It was about reclaiming something they had tried to take from me, about finally having the upper hand in a dynamic where I had always been the underdog. With the funds in my possession, I faced a new question. What now? For years, my focus had been on surviving, on proving that I could make it on my own. Now, with financial security, I had the freedom to think bigger. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that reflected the lessons I had learned through all this chaos. That's when the idea came to me: a charity. Throughout my ordeal, I had encountered countless stories of people who, like me, had been victims of financial manipulation or abuse. Whether it was controlling parents, exploitative partners, or systemic inequities, the theme was the same: people left powerless by those who should have been protecting them. I wanted to change that. I used part of the inheritance to establish the Phoenix Foundation, named for the idea of rising from the ashes of adversity. The foundation's mission was to provide financial assistance, legal resources, and counseling to individuals who had been victimized by financial abuse. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving people the tools to rebuild their lives and regain their independence. The process of building the foundation was both challenging and rewarding. I worked with lawyers, financial advisors, and social workers to create a robust program that could make a real impact. Along the way, I met incredible people who shared their stories with me. Stories of resilience, survival, and, ultimately, triumph. One of the first people we helped was a woman named Rachel. She had been trapped in an abusive marriage where her husband controlled every aspect of their finances. When she finally escaped, she had nothing: no money, no credit, and no support system. Through the foundation, we were able to help her secure housing, rebuild her credit, and eventually start her own small business. Seeing her succeed was one of the most fulfilling moments of my life. The foundation became my new purpose, my way of turning years of pain into something positive. It didn't erase what had happened to me, but it gave me a sense of control over my narrative. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone who could make a difference. As for my parents and Melanie, I haven't spoken to them since the court ruling. I hear bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. Melanie is still struggling. My parents are still trying to justify their actions, but I've made peace with the fact that they're no longer part of my life. I don't hate them. I just don't have room for them anymore. The final message from my parents came late one evening, long after I thought the dust had settled. I was at home, working on some paperwork for the Phoenix Foundation, when my phone buzzed. It was an email. At first, I didn't even recognize the address. My parents had never been tech-savvy, and they rarely communicated by email. But there it was, sitting in my inbox, a subject line that read, "We need to talk." I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it on the spot, to let it go unread like the dozens of other messages they'd sent over the years. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering thread of hope, got the better of me. The email was long, filled with a mix of pleas, justifications, and accusations. They wrote about how they missed me, how they didn't understand why I was being so cold toward them. They mentioned Melanie, saying she was struggling more than ever and needed her family to support her. Then came the guilt trips. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. And we're your parents, Alex. You owe us respect." I read the whole thing twice, just to be sure I wasn't misinterpreting anything. It was classic them, deflecting blame, refusing to take responsibility, and trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty for decisions I had every right to make. It wasn't the first time they tried this, but something about it felt final, like they were making one last desperate attempt to reel me back in. The same night, I received a separate message from Melanie. Hers was shorter, but no less manipulative. She accused me of ruining her life, of turning our parents against her, and of being selfish for not helping her when she needed it. "You'll regret this one day," she wrote, as if her words could scare me into submission. I closed my laptop and sat there in silence for a long time. I thought about everything that had happened. The years of neglect, the court battles, the lies, and the betrayals. I thought about the times I had cried myself to sleep as a teenager, wondering why I wasn't good enough for my own family. I thought about how hard I had worked to build a life for myself, only for them to try to tear it down time and time again. Then I thought about the Phoenix Foundation, about Rachel and the other people we'd helped. I thought about the life I was building, one filled with purpose and freedom. And in that moment, the choice became clear. I didn't respond to their messages. Instead, I wrote a single sentence on a piece of paper and pinned it to the bulletin board in my office. "The past doesn't own you." It became my mantra, a reminder that I didn't have to let their actions define me or dictate my future. Over the next few weeks, I took concrete steps to close the door on that chapter of my life. I blocked their email addresses and phone numbers, ensuring they couldn't reach me anymore. I even moved to a new apartment and kept the address private, just in case they decided to show up unannounced. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only way to truly protect myself from their toxicity. Despite cutting ties, I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons I'd learned from the experience. For years, I had let their words and actions shape how I saw myself. I had internalized their criticisms, their favoritism, and their manipulation. But now, I understood that their behavior said more about them than it did about me. It wasn't my job to fix them or to carry the weight of their expectations. I decided to write about my experiences on the Phoenix Foundation's blog. It wasn't an easy post to write. Reliving those memories was painful, but I felt it was important to share my story. I wanted others to know they weren't alone, that it was okay to set boundaries and prioritize their own well-being, even if it meant walking away from family. In the post, I wrote about the importance of self-respect and the dangers of letting guilt dictate your choices. I talked about how manipulation can come in many forms and how recognizing it is the first step toward breaking free. Most importantly, I encouraged readers to trust their instincts and to remember that love isn't supposed to hurt. The response was overwhelming. The post went viral, and I received hundreds of messages from people who had gone through similar experiences. Some shared their own stories of toxic families and financial abuse, while others simply thanked me for giving them the courage to make a change in their lives. It was humbling and heartbreaking all at once. One message stood out to me. It was from a man named Marcus, who had been disowned by his parents after refusing to co-sign a loan for his younger brother. He wrote about how he had spent years feeling like a failure, like he had let his family down. But after reading my post, he realized he wasn't alone. "Your story gave me the strength to move forward," he wrote. "Thank you." It was moments like that that reminded me why I had started the foundation in the first place. Turning my pain into something positive didn't erase the hurt, but it gave it meaning. It turned a chapter of my life that had been defined by loss into one defined by growth. As for my parents and Melanie, I have no idea where they are now or what they're doing. I assume they're still tangled in their web of lies and excuses, but that's no longer my concern. I don't hate them anymore. If anything, I feel sorry for them. They'll never know the freedom that comes from letting go of anger and resentment. They'll never know what it feels like to build something meaningful from the ashes of their mistakes. My final advice to anyone reading this is simple. Don't let anyone, family, friends, or otherwise, take advantage of your kindness or guilt you into sacrificing your happiness. Set boundaries, enforce them, and don't apologize for protecting your peace. Life is too short to carry someone else's baggage. And remember, no matter how hard it gets, the past doesn't own you. You have the power to write your own story, just like I did. And trust me, it's worth it.